So there's a chapter in your book where you mention, what I think was one of the most fascinating parts that stuck out to me the most was you go to his apartment in Northern California. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what happened there?
He has a beautiful apartment and has an amazing view of San Francisco. And so we were in his apartment, and he showed me his library, which is really amazing. And he had a lot of, historical things from the history of ufology in the United States, and things from, European Catholic history, like looked like extant, copies of books about angels and things like that. So it was amazing, and things that belonged to Allen Hynek and things like that.
And you were shocked, I think, to see all of the books that he had on angels that were in his library.
I was.
Would you ask him about that? What did he say about that?
So in the library, he showed me a lot of books about, like I said, the history of ufology, like, historical stuff from Project Blue Book. And
right. That's the kind of stuff that I would expect to see in Jacques Vallée's library.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, but most of the library was dedicated to these very old books of angels. And so he took out a couple and he showed them to me. And he had a whole row of angels and a whole row of like fallen angels type thing. And he made some jokes about it, well, if you have one, you have to have the other kind of thing.
And he gave you a book at the end of your meeting with him that day? What was this book?
Okay, so...
book on the devil? Right?
Well, it was a history of Satan.
Okay.
And it was done by these Carmelite nuns. And so he gave me the book and he said, you should try to acquire this book. It's really good. And I looked at it, and then the paging on it was really interesting. It was the last page was 666. So he laughed and said they had a sense of humor, And so, yeah, that was, at the time I was really shocked by that. And thought it was, what? So it took me a while to actually talk to him about it, because I thought, how do you ask somebody about this, right? So I did ask him, and he said that, and he's right. So the way we see, he was basically suggesting it because of the ways in which, how the ways in which the UFO are made to look kind of a certain way, but when you look into it, they look different. And the same way with religious traditions, like Teresa of Avila's experience with the little angel. If you look at pictures and paintings from that and the statue of that, it looks very different than the primary source material.
Okay, like the description that she actually gave when she wrote it.
Yeah, it looks completely different than what you call it, telephone game. Right? Yeah, so there's telephone game in texts too, right? Okay. And in representations of spiritual experiences. So basically he was saying that if you look at the history of this person, not person, with this being, that it's going to look completely different. And the people that did the best biography are these Carmelite nuns who had access to all of the primary source material.
Did you read the book?
So I did look for the book, and I didn't do a hard search for it because I was so busy.
Right.
I haven't been able to, but I do want to acquire the book, absolutely. So no, I have not read it. But, his work is basically to look at these texts, just like my work is, to look at the primary sources and to create his own understanding of it instead of looking at what people say about these primary sources. So that's the work he was trying to do with that book, and why he gave it to me. I think he also gave it to me because I'm not sure. He's funny. He's got a good sense of humor. He may have been trying to kind of shock me. I don't know. But it was pretty funny at the time.
Demonology, or to understand Satan, or to understand any of these things, I think requires one to step out of that worldview and to look at it in a way that is comparative and can say, oh, well, there are parapsychological phenomena involved in possession cases. I mean, people float off the ground. But that doesn't mean that this is Satan or this is a demon. It might mean that the person thinks it's Satan or thinks it's a demon, sure. But I don't honor anyone's religious beliefs. People can think it's all kinds of things, believe it's all kinds of things. Okay, that doesn't mean it is. From a comparative or a global perspective, it's something else is going on there. And I think with Jacques' work, I think he feels that the history of esotericism and certainly the history of Satan in this Carmelite nun sense has something to do with the UFO as well, in a comparative sense now, because you're getting at the same kind of phenomenon, and at the root of this, you're looking at me funny, Danny. At the root of this conviction is that human beings have a capacity to experience God or reality as it really is. There's a kind of direct link there, but there's also sometimes when they have these experiences, this science fiction movie goes off and they experience demons or angels or deities, or spacemen or aliens or visitors or whatever. So this folklore that develops around these cases is really important. It gives us an access to it. But if we interpret it literally, we're in trouble, because then we can only interpret that particular case literally, or we shove it back into some kind of framework that makes us comfortable, which may be wrong, which may be inadequate. I suspect it is. I suspect all of our frameworks are inadequate.
What do you think is going on when people are possessed and they have and with exorcists, with exorcisms? I
think they've experienced a lot of trauma and that they're mentally suffering, and that some part of them is breaking off of their other part, and they're seeing this other part of them as the demon or the possessing the entity. That's what I think.
Have you ever witnessed an exorcism?
No, I have not, and I don't want to, by the way.
Have you ever talked to an exorcist?
No.
No.
I've read exorcists. I've read about exorcism, but I haven't actually talked to an exorcist. And I'm sure if it's an exorcist, they're going to believe that most of the cases are psychiatric or not really demonic, and they're going to believe some of the cases are. Otherwise, why would you be an exorcist? But there are lots of forms of exorcism, Danny. There's exorcism in religions all over the world. Mm-hmm. So, again, this is my question. Why is that? Why are human beings always possessed by essentially the local entities of the particular religion or the particular culture? Why is that? Well, that to me is a really good question. And it pushes back, to me, it pushes back on the human for me, and it's that, well, there's some part of this human being that's breaking off, and it's taking on whatever the cultural form happens to be in the local area.
Yeah, so the spirituality of the flying saucer?
Yeah.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, it's what I'm working on now, and it goes back to this idea that one of my jokes is, strange beings come out of the sky and mess with people. That's called religion. It's also called the flying saucer or the UFO. I think if you look at people's encounters with flying saucers or UFOs, there's a kind of transcendence there. There's a kind of awe and inspiration there. And by transcendence, I mean they can't really be explained by our social location, by society, or even by nature, which is what science wants to do, by the way. It wants to build a model of the UFO that's based on the mathematics and principles of material science. And I think that's mistaken. I think the saucer appears to human beings as not part of this world, but yet a part of this world. So it appears at a particular moment in time, at a particular crisis point, a transition point, but it also talks about a world that is not society, is not the world, is not the place of the person. And to me, that's the most defining feature of the UFO phenomenon, is that otherness that I don't want to reduce to things we think we understand.
The Anunnaki come from the Sumerian and Babylonian texts.
Those texts came from when?
Like 3000 BC.
3000 BC.
Yeah, like this is the oldest text that exists in the world. Like there's nothing older than Sumerian text. I mean, there's stories that predate these texts, but they're not written down. This is Sumer is the first place where we get written text. And they're in cuneiform and Akkadian, and they write about these Anunnaki. And there's this group of gods that, and sometimes they're in the underworld, and some stories they're in the heavens. Depends on what story you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it's the underworld gods, which is a misconception. People think that these are coming from above, but most of the texts describe them as in the underworld. Mm-hmm. But there are some texts that do describe them coming from the heavens, so that there is some credibility there. But they get lumped in with the Nephilim because the Nephilim are also described as these.
Oh, these are the tablets.
Those are the old ancient Sumerian tablets. Yeah.
Wow.
They're from like 3000, 2000 BC, somewhere in between, 2500 BC. Yeah, super old. Now check this out, right? So the Nephilim are these like fallen gods. Sometimes they're called giants because Nephil can mean giant in Greek, but Nephil also can mean to fall. So depending on how you read it, it could be fallen ones or giants. And there's two different translations for that. In some texts, they're the fallen ones. In some texts, they're the giants. Or maybe they're both. Maybe that's a pun. You never know. But they get lumped in with the Anunnaki because the story is very similar as the Anunnaki, in the sense that there are stories of Anunnaki being cast out from the presence of Enlil. And they end up serving other purposes, and that's how they get. So there's a very similar story happening between the two, which I think there's some credibility to that. But this is where it gets crazy.
How the hell do you translate that?
I don't know. They can read that though. People can read that.
Looks like chicken scratch.
Yeah, it does. Samuel Noah Kramer translated all these texts that I'm about to describe, and one of the texts that mentions the Anunnaki, there's a guy named what's his name? Utnapishtim. And there's a couple different flood stories. One of them is called Artahasis. That's another guy. And the other one's called the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
And this guy, so depending on which story you're getting at, the guy whoever's in the flood story, he survives a flood that's...
Gilgamesh, I think it is.
Well, Gilgamesh, that's the name of the story, but the guy's name is Artahasis, who survives the flood.
Okay.
And he survives this flood, and at the end of the story, he lets off a dove and a raven and waits for 7 days for them to come back. This is exactly what Genesis says for Noah. When Noah is at the end of the flood after 40 days, he lets off a dove and a raven and waits 7 days for them to return. It's exactly the same. They're literally borrowing from this story. So the story of Noah surviving the ark is actually predated by thousands of years in this Sumerian story. So there's two ways of looking at it. You can be critical and say, yeah, this is an ancient story, an ancient pagan story being repurposed by the Jews. Or you could say, this is actually so ancient and so true that it shows up in this other story in the ancient world. Depending on how you want to spin it, right? You can make it positive for the Noah's Ark. Say Noah's Ark is so true that we find it in another version in a different story. Or you can say it's such a retelling of an ancient pagan story that it can't be true because it's already in a text from 1,000 years before Noah was ever talked about.
Right.
Because there's no mention of Noah until classical period, it's Hellenistic period, basically Persian period. If you want to be like, give him a little bit of maybe Persian period, but there's no mention of Noah before that.
So the story goes that the Anunnaki, the Enlil and Enki, created these Ajijis who were supposed to terraform the earth, and they got tired of working or whatever, and then they created human beings somehow.
Yep.
Or they like sacrificed a god to create humans to be the slaves to do all this hard work.
Yeah, and Enki, and this is where I get into this is like Enki is this god in the ancient Sumerian stories who he creates humans, but he's also like a trickster. And he seems to always defy the will of Enlil. So he's almost like a proto-Satan character, where he cares about humans, but when Enlil wants to flood everybody, he wants to kill humans, Enlil, because he's sick of them. He wants to flood them out. They're all sinners. They're all dumbasses. But Enki saves them. Enki's the one that tells Artaxerxes to build the ark because Enlil's going to kill you guys. He wasn't supposed to do that. He defies the will of Enlil. This also happens in the Greek mythology when Zeus is fed up with humans. He wants to send a flood.
Right.
It's Prometheus who says, hey, Zeus is going to kill you all. Prometheus is the creator god and he's a trickster. So Prometheus is the Greek version of Enki.
And just in Western pop culture, this and that, right? You know, the occult loves Lucifer, the Christians abhor Lucifer, but Lucifer never existed in the Bible. And the reason why we created that archetype was because we had misunderstood and mistranslated the Hebrew text. So the entire world learned about Lucifer through one verse in the Torah, which is Isaiah 14:12. And that's the famous verse that goes, "O Lucifer, how art thou fallen," etc., etc. And we translated the word Lucifer into the English as an uppercase noun, a name with a big L. But we got the English from the Latin. And the Latin is where the word Lucifer is first shown to us, because it's a Latin word comprised of two root words, lucis, light, and fere, which means to bring or to hold. And that's where the occult got the idea of Lucifer being the light bearer or light bringer. But we got the Latin version from the Greek version. And in the Greek, where we would see Lucifer, we would see the word phosphorus, which is equivalent to the which is equivalent to the Latin Lucifer, which means light or fire or bright. But we got all of those from the Hebrew, which is Hillel ben Shahar. And Hillel ben Shahar means Hillel, son of Shahar. And the word Hillel means bright or shiny. And so that's where we got Lucifer, son of the morning, Hillel ben Shahar, because Shahar also means morning, right?
Okay, yeah.
But there's a reason why that is used in the Torah. Isaiah was a royal prophet and a royal scribe, and he was writing during the time of the Babylonian exile, when the Babylonians were descending upon the kingdom of Judah and taking them all into captivity. And so he was writing a prophecy about the downfall of the Babylonians, saying that they are like Hillel ben Shahar. Hillel ben Shahar was actually a Canaanite deity belonging to an old mythology before Judaism. And in that mythology, Hillel was a younger god who tried to rise to the throne, but failed. But it gets even deeper. The word Hillel, the Greek word phosphorus, the Latin word Lucifer are all words that could be used to describe or denote Venus. And Venus is the brightest celestial object in the sky preceding the sun.
Right.
And so Hillel was another version of an ancient Canaanite deity known as Athtar. And Athtar was a male rendition of the female Astarte, who was also Ishtar, who was also Inanna. And all of these goddesses were also represented by the star or the symbol of Venus. And so Isaiah was prophetically and poetically saying that the Babylonians are like Venus, they are like Hillel. They think they are something bright and shiny, but they will soon be overshadowed by God or the sun.
The sun, yeah.
So that's what he was really saying. So the early Christians kind of looked at this and were like, oh, wow, like he's talking about some person named Lucifer. But we totally just took that and ran with it and exaggerated it. And so there never was a Lucifer. And so we took that, ran with it. And primarily, Oregon...
So we said there never was a Lucifer. Well, they mentioned Lucifer and the L wasn't capitalized, meaning it wasn't a person?
Yeah.
So it was a symbol?
Well, Lucifer is a Latin word, and it was the translation of Hillel ben Shahar. So there never was a Lucifer character. And when I say there never was a Lucifer character, what I mean is there was never this right-hand angel that was the leader of some choir who rebelled against God and then was cast down to earth. That's the whole Lucifer mythos. That was put together over hundreds of years by Christians, but it all started with the mistranslation of what Isaiah was saying.
Oh, okay. So Hillel ben Shahar was the source of what we created.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, okay, so what? But the reason that's important is because if you break down what Isaiah was doing, then it kind of opens up a whole other discussion. Because what he was doing was he was referencing even older Canaanite mythologies. And this is what this whole Anunnaki thing is based off of. The whole Anunnaki thing is based off of the fact that Judaism, which is basically the first Abrahamic religion, is all based off of the Anunnaki tales. And I can give you an even crazier example. For example, in Genesis 1:26, right, when man is being created, you can open up any English Bible to this day and go to Genesis 1:26, and it'll read, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness." And there is plurality there. If you were to ask any theologian or whatever and be like, why is there plurality there? They would give you some cute answer like it's God talking to himself or God talking to Jesus or whatever. But that's not the truth. The reason there's plurality there is because the word that was used in the Hebrew text, the original, was not God. The word that was used was Elohim. And Elohim is a plural word, meaning the powerful ones. So if you go back and read Genesis 1:26 with that in mind, now you're reading, the powerful ones said, let us make man in our image after our likeness.
So who are the powerful ones?
Well, the powerful ones are the Anunnaki. And the reason that is so, and how we know that, is because the people who wrote the Bible, they were from the Middle East. They lived in that area. They lived closer in time to the Babylonians, to ancient Sumer and all that. So the Sumerians were their ancestors. They knew those tales by heart. For example, the Sumerian Enuma Elish was reenacted every year in Babylon at the Akitu New Year Festival. So these were their ancestors. They knew these tales. They implemented them into their new religion.